Roger, speaking as an old brain scientist, consciousness has been something I have been fascinated with virtually my entire life. And I have to tell you, I was thrilled when you, as a world-class mathematician, began focusing on consciousness in your work. Why is consciousness so important to you?
I guess there's a personal reason, which may be a bit irrelevant, but when I was growing up, I was, both my parents were medical, and my father in particular had an interest in mental issues and philosophy of mind, but he became an expert in the inheritance of mental disease and this kind of thing. So this was a sort of background to the family. Now, I was one of three brothers. I had a sister who came along later, but three brothers, and they, for some reason, decided I was going to carry on the traditions in the family of being the medical one, you see. And I went along with this. You know, I think they thought of me as being a medical doctor. Secretly, I was going to be a brain surgeon, you see.
Oh, so was I.
You were too. Actually, it's interesting. You know, I thought you could open them up and find out how the blasted thing works.
Right, that's what I wanted to do.
But then the moment came when we had to decide which of the last 2 years at school we went to, and I'm afraid because at that school we weren't allowed to do mathematics and biology at the same time. That was when my career went in the wrong direction from their point of view. So I decided on keeping up with the mathematics, which is something which very much interested me at that time. But it's kind of ironic that in some sense, later on, from quite a different direction, I have become particularly interested in this issue of consciousness and how it might relate to the laws of physics and so on.
Well, this is an extraordinary contribution to our understanding of consciousness, which is becoming really one of the most important subjects that we can deal with, not just in understanding ourselves, but perhaps in understanding the universe itself. You have focused on the nature of consciousness relative to computation, which is an area of hot discussion among many different kinds of people. And let's discuss the possible different kinds of relationships that computation can have with consciousness.
Well, you could take the view, which I think a lot of people do regard in a way as being the only scientific view, namely that particularly in this computer age, when we know we have these machines that can do extraordinary things, can play chess fantastically well and so on. And the view of many people, many scientifically minded people, is that whatever the brain is doing, it's following some computational procedure, which you could imitate or exceed by these devices, which can compute much faster than we can.
In essence, all of consciousness can be simulated on a computer.
That's the view. That's right.
At some point or
so that's
another.
view A, if you like. A is that that's all there is to it, and that if you do the right computation, somehow this feeling of consciousness will arise.
And therefore, a computer, ultimately, some ultimate quantum computer 100,000 years from now or 100 years from now, would be conscious.
Yeah, well, the view tended to be more like 10 years or something.
Yeah, well,
some people were saying things like that.
Right.
Yes, that's right. But, okay, that's A.
That's A.
And B is that, okay, you could make a computer do all the things we can do externally. So you wouldn't be able to tell the difference from the way it behaves between a computer or a human being. But nevertheless, the computer would not have this awareness that we have.
There would be nothing inside. It would be...
It wouldn't feel anything.
Yeah, it would be... Yeah. We sometimes use the word zombie. It would look like it does the same thing.
That's right.
But it would have no interior life.
That's right. So it's the philosopher's zombie. That's right. Yes. Yes. So that's B.
That's B.
And then there's C, which is that it couldn't really. I mean, computation. There's something outside computation involved in conscious activity, and I should say that C is my own view, really. And this comes from, I should say, some theorems in logic and so on, which seem to indicate that mathematical understanding, which seems to me is something which does require consciousness, is something which cannot be achieved purely in a computational way. So there's something else going on of a non-computational character. That needs to be explained a bit more.
We're going to get into that in detail, for sure.
Yes.
But let's get to D,
And
which
then
is
D is basically that it's not a question that science can answer. That consciousness is something quite outside any kind of scientific.
So that could be a traditional, what we call substance dualism, that there's a non-physical something that science could never explore, so it's outside that the bounds of science.
That's right. That's right.
And it may interact with the material world, scientific world, but we cannot study that in its own right ever.
That's right.
All right, so let's focus on C.
Okay.
And so what we're saying in essence in C is that consciousness can never be simulated, but we need a new kind of understanding of the physical world, mathematics, in some way to be able to express it.
Well, it really comes from the knowledge that there are certain things in mathematics which are outside computation. That's not so well known, I think, to people outside mathematics, that there are things which you simply can't do by computation. There's some quite well-defined problems, which I can give you an example.
Yes, please.
You can take the problem of trying to cover the plane with, say, polygonal shapes. So you have various different kinds of shapes.
Yes.
Maybe a finite number of them, say 6 or 7 shapes.
Yes.
And you've got to fit these together with no overlaps and no holes, so that they cover the entire plane, right to infinity, you see. Okay, so the problem is, given these shapes, can you cover the plane or not with them? And yes or no, it's a straightforward yes or no problem. And you can have the shapes coded in a very nice computable way so that you can put them on your machine. And is there a computer algorithm which can answer yes or no to this? Well, there isn't any. And this is known. So this is an example of a non-computational problem. And it's conceivable that the universe operates in a way in accordance with such a thing. What it does from one moment to the next might depend on something like answering a question. Clearly isn't that, but I mean, something which has that character of non-computableness, you see.
And that's purely in the physical world.
It could be. It could be. We don't know enough about the way physical world operates. I think most people regard this as a bit of a long shot, that it would be like that. My view is that it's not a long shot, and that probably is something like that.
Well, let's continue on the flow. So we've now established there are some other things that are non-computable.
Yes.
So now, what reason do we have that consciousness would be in that same category?
Well, my reason comes from the famous Gödel theorem, actually.
Yes.
It's often phrased in somewhat different way from the way I like to appeal to it. Some people say, well, Gödel showed, the famous logician Kurt Gödel, showed that there are mathematical statements which are unprovable. What he really showed was that if you're given any system of proof procedures, which can be, he didn't quite state it like this, but this is a nice way of putting it. Suppose you're given a set of proof procedures which can be checked computationally. So you could have a computer algorithm which says, okay, here's a proof. Is this really a proof or not? You feed it into the machine and it says yes or no. And now, if your proof procedures are like that, that is to say, are they computationally checkable?
Yes.
Then any such system which you trust, Gödel shows, okay, here is a statement I've made up out of these rules, which I can show, if you trust those rules, you've also got to trust this statement. Yes. That is to say, this statement is definitely true if those rules don't give you nonsense like 2 = 3.
Yes.
But this statement is not provable by those rules. So your belief in the rules extends beyond the use of the rules. Right? That's a good way of putting it. You say, so that the insights which you have to believe in those, gives you trust in those rules, you can use that same insight to extend beyond the rules. And this seems to be, what on earth's going on there, you see? It means that there is something in understanding which goes beyond purely following rules.
And do you get to consciousness as metaphor or as reality?
Well, what I'm saying, the way the argument is used in my type of reasoning is that understanding, whatever that is, is not something which can be reduced to computational procedures, so that a computer doesn't have it, if you like.
Okay.
Just by virtue of any kind of computational activity, it doesn't have understanding. And that's clearly what happens when we use computers. So you use computers, you put in the understanding. You say, well, look, if we program it this way, it'll do that, and so on.
Well, the argument would be because our computers are very simple and are very linear, and if you had massive parallel quantum computers, you can simulate the brain activity, which is done in a different way. It's just our poor computers. But what you're saying is that the inherent logical structure of understanding goes beyond it. So there would be never any hope, no matter how you imagine your computer. It's impossible.
That is what I'm saying. Yes.
All right. So
you
now
you might get close to it because there's a trade-off. You see, I mean, like chess computers. I mean, they play marvelous chess, but they don't use it. They don't use understanding.
Right.
Human being will use understanding, and they can sometimes do things in ways using understanding that it's hard to do using computation. But with enough brute force computation, you might feel, well, we don't need the understanding.
Right.
But these are things which are not like that. You really do need the understanding.
Okay, let's follow the argument.
Yeah.
It can't be computed. It now needs the understanding. So what's our next step? How do we now go to consciousness for what we know?
The next step is, okay, well, suppose physical laws are computational.
Yes.
If they just are things you could imitate by a computer, then it's hard to see how in our brains, I am saying they follow the same physical laws that a chair and so on, everything else does.
Sure.
So if they're following the same physical laws, what are those physical laws? Are they things which you could, in principle, put on a computer? Now, most of the time we do wonderful things. When I say we, I don't do this often, but scientists say in astrophysics, you could work out how stars, how galaxies will behave, and enormous detail, and see that they agree with observation. And okay, so the behavior of these big macroscopic bodies seems to be in accordance with some computational procedure. Likewise, you can look at particles and so on, and the laws which govern small things, again, seem to be purely computational. So is there any scope for anything else, you see? Well, there's one big thing in physics that we don't understand at the moment. I mean, there are lots of things we don't understand, but they're either to do with very small things. I mean, what are the laws which govern particles or something, or they might be to do with the universe as a whole, or all sorts of issues, what happens to black holes when they, and so on. But they're not directly relevant. Is there anything of direct relevance to possibly the operation of a brain? And I think there is one big loophole in our present understanding of physics, and that has to do with quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, as we presently understand it, consists of two pieces which are inconsistent with each other. Now, when I say this, I may get into trouble with a lot of my physicist friends, but it seems to me that they are inconsistent. One of them is the famous Schrödinger equation, which tells you how a system evolves. It's a computational thing. You know what the initial state of your system is, and you chug away, and it tells you what the state will be in 10 minutes. Okay, but that's not what you see, because there's another part of quantum mechanics, which is the measurement part. And the measurement process in quantum mechanics is completely different. It doesn't follow the Schrödinger equation. It's probabilistic instead of deterministic, and you can't compute it because it's the result of what's going to happen it doesn't tell you. It just says what the probabilities of alternatives are. And these things, although people don't like to say they're incompatible, they are mutually inconsistent. They're compatible in a certain sense. They dovetail beautifully, the two procedures, but they aren't consistent. You say, why does a measurement not follow the deterministic Schrödinger equation? Something else happens. Well, I say, other physicists will have lots of other ways of coming to terms with this. I say, we haven't got the right theory yet. The right theory is something which at a level, a macroscopic level, will deviate from Schrödinger's famous equation. And whereas he was saying that too. I mean, Schrödinger famously had this example of a cat that he said, in principle, I could set up an experiment where this cat would be alive and dead at the same time. According to I wouldn't say my equation, I mean Schrödinger's equation. The equation would be alive and dead the cat would be alive and dead at the same time. And that's clear implication of his equation. But he says that's ridiculous. It wouldn't be. It would either be alive or dead. So he's saying, in a sense, there's something more that we don't yet understand.
And you say that whatever that is that we may find may have a direct relationship to consciousness?
Well, that's what I think, yes. But it's the Sherlock Holmes argument. It's a weak argument, but it's saying, when you've eliminated the impossible, the only thing that remains must be the truth. You see, so
However improbable.
No matter how improbable it is, that's right, yes. Anyway, it's that sort of an argument. So I'm saying, okay, it doesn't seem maybe at first sight that it's likely that there is some role for, this sort of borderline between quantum mechanical behavior and classical behavior, that should have direct relevance to consciousness. But then what else is there which can have this role of being non-computational?
The argument given by traditional neuroscientists to that is that they occur on radically different orders of magnitude, that the quantum effect is so small and would be averaged together or would the wave function would decohere at a low level. By the time you get to the cell membrane, the neurons, it's such a different order of magnitude that one has nothing to do with the other. That's the counter
I think
argument.
when you think about when you think about nerve transmission, I think that's a fairly clear argument, because there will be enough disturbance. Any nerve signal will certainly disturb the ambient material in the brain, and I don't think there's any way around that. So although I did wonder about this for a while, it seems to me it's pretty hopeless to think that standard nerve signaling is going to be able to preserve quantum coherence. I should explain, first of all, that quantum effects don't have to be small. They can certainly stretch over large distances, up to something like 100 miles now even. There are quantum effects stretch over those kind of distances. So they don't have to be small in that sense. And, things like superconductors and superfluids and things are quantum mechanical effects, which are on a macroscopic scale. But on the other hand, any kind of disturbance into the environment, does the quantum system somehow interfere with the environment, or does it lose information in the environment? Then you're in trouble.
I think the core idea that there has to be something in consciousness that is different than our normal expectation cannot be avoided.
I think that's right. There has to be something of different character. I think this is perhaps it's a bit of an emotional argument, but I think it's as strong an argument as any of the others. You can go into Gödel's theorem and all that stuff. Right. But there is the feeling that there's something very different about consciousness from all other things in the physical world.
So what does that imply about the nature of consciousness, the importance of consciousness in the structure of all reality?
Well, I think if you take the view, as I do, that it's still just the same physical laws which are operating everywhere, but somehow in a human brain, and I would say in animal brains too, certainly most of them, there must be some picking out of something that's out there in the physical world, but it's being organized in a way which you don't find in other structures. But it's still there. And if it's going to be something big and important, the best place I see, and it seems to me easily the best place to look, is in what I refer to as the measurement paradox of quantum mechanics. There is something we really don't understand between the level of the operation of Schrödinger's equation and the observational, the sort of measurement part of quantum mechanics, where one thing happens or another thing happens. And that's Schrödinger equation somehow tells you that these two things which might happen coexist. And that's not what we see.
It's extraordinary that this consciousness of human beings and animals on a macroscopic scale can be so probative of the structure of reality.
Well, I think that different physicists have different views about the role of consciousness, and some thought it's the sort of observer as an essential part of quantum mechanics. I'm rather looking at it the other way around. I say that quantum mechanics, and we have to look for a better physical theory, but when we have that, we'll have more of a hope of being able to understand what on earth this phenomenon of consciousness is in physical terms. So it's a long-term project.
And why is it that important to you?
Well, I think consciousness is. I mean, it's what we are in a certain sense. And I mean, personally, it's I guess has a role because my father had this great interest from way back, and clearly it was a thing that he worried about from a different angle from myself. But he obviously worried about this question, and I think he would have been intrigued by seeing how the whole thing has gone.